Great. Good morning, everybody. Looks like people are getting on. Welcome to the webinar. We'll just take a second to let folks find their way here, and then we'll get started. We had about 29 folks signed up for the session this morning. I see 11 of you are here. People are starting to figure out that we're posting this, so if they can't make it, they know they can see it later. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we should just launch in, and folks can jump in when they get on. So I want to welcome everybody to this webinar on databases for river and watershed groups. My name is Shawn Morford. I'm the Executive Director of the Network of Oregon Watershed Councils. I'm the sort of the moderator and troubleshooter of the session today. And you may know that the network is part of a larger partnership called the Oregon Conservation Partnership, and we've been organizing at least monthly, maybe sometimes more frequently than that, webinars on various topics for the SWCDs and land trusts and watershed councils. And I am particularly excited about this one because I heard Baird give this session at the National River Network conference in Michigan last April. And it was a real wow moment for me when I realized that there are tools out there for making our work easier and more effective. And so I asked Baird after the session if he would consider doing this as a webinar for Oregon, and he agreed to do it. We had lunch together when he was on vacation, and we talked a little bit about the approach. And so here he is. He's sitting in his office in Annapolis, Maryland. And I don't think we can see you yet, Baird, but if you put on your webcam, we'll be able to see you. Baird is a consultant in leadership and capacity building in there he is, in the river conservation community, and he's been a longtime developer of databases for nonprofits, worked for 9 years as the Associate Director for the Institute of Conservation Leadership, and has come full circle now to develop some software in database software that I've invited him to talk a little bit about as part of his presentation today. So I just want to give you a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Everybody is muted by default, but we don't want to leave you out of this conversation, so there are a couple of different ways that you can interact. One is that you have a little hand icon on your screen, you should anyway, that if you click on it, it will show me as the moderator that you want to be unmuted and have a question asked. So once I see a hand, I'll unmute you and invite you to ask your question. The other way to do it is to ask a question in the question box, and I'll be monitoring those questions. And if you're not asking a question that's relevant to everybody, I'll just correspond with you. But if it's a question that would be relevant to have everybody here, I'll read the question out loud, and we can let Baird respond to it. This session is being recorded, and it will be posted on the Network of Oregon Watershed Council's website probably by the end of the week. And I posted the link to Baird's PowerPoint in the chat box, so hopefully you can cut and paste that if you want to follow along or have a copy of it that you want to quickly print while we're going. Lastly, we did advertise this as a 30-minute webinar, as a coffee break webinar, but when Baird and I ran through the dry run of this, we realized there was so much good material, I don't want to cut him short. So I've agreed to have him go for 30 minutes at least, and then that will leave plenty of time for discussion and questions afterwards. And I know that Baird is going to make himself available after the session for anybody who wants to do a follow-up contact with him. I think that is all. I'm going to turn off my camera, Baird, and let you take it away.
All right, great. Thank you very much. And I guess I should ask, can everybody see, is there anybody who can't see my screen with the databases for river and watershed groups? So I'll let you please tell Sean if that's the case.
Raise your hand if you can't hear him.
Yeah. Um, and I, I had worked for a long time in management of river and watershed organizations and frequently presented at River Network about various different management issues. And at some point, I was doing a lot of training and organizing volunteers and realizing that the organizations I was working with didn't really track their volunteer participants. They often did not even capture their names. And since in many cases volunteerism was the most important source of the most important resource that they had, it seemed to me like they needed tools to be able to do that. And so one thing led to another, and now I dug back into databases from an early lifetime in databases. I went back there again and have built a database on Salesforce, and I'll show you a little bit of it, but this webinar really is not about Watergraphs, the database that we do. It's really about how you can best choose a database that fits you. And I'll have some recommendations for you at the end that are based on our surveys of groups and what they say they like. So let's see, I'm gonna hide my webcam and continue. I want to thank those of you. Yes, great. I wanted to say first that through River Network, we've got about 14 years of data now on how organizations are growing and what practices they have in place and whether the practices matter. And one thing that we've seen that really does matter is that groups that track their data in a single database tend to grow more than groups who track it in less unified manners. So here we're looking at the results of about 60 organizations, I believe, for which we had matched reports within 1,000 days or greater than 1,000 days. So we're looking at a span of about 3 years. And you can see those groups that just kept their data in written lists tended actually to shrink over time in terms of their budget, whereas the groups that had unified in a single database tended to grow. So that one hard metric indicates that the databases really do matter. And I think the databases are an indicator of a lot of other internal organizational practices that are also related to growth. So it's not the database itself. In fact, the database is almost the tip of the iceberg, and we'll get into that. Thanks to the 16 people who entered, who responded to the survey that Sean set out for me. Here are the databases that you use now. When asked with the list that I gave you, the breakdown was like this, and you can read it. A couple groups also mentioned that they customized access or they were in the process of customizing access. One group mentioned that they were starting to use Salesforce. I'll just mention Salesforce. One, because our database is built on it, Watergraphs is built on it. Two, because it's very powerful, also complicated, and it is free to nonprofits. So many of you would have access to it for free, and it is truly, they give you 10 licenses for free, and that would cost a business $15,000 a year. And I know that to be true because I pay for mine. So these are the databases that groups used, and in general, they were somewhat satisfied with their databases. what you told me you wanted to be able to do. One was to track outreach and participation. So get your email to guest list together with your workshop registration, be able to send letters out to people. A major part of this probably came from those of you in the soil and water conservation districts, and that was tracking projects, landowner permission forms, etc. And one group mentioned in particular matching the contact to the site information so that they could track that. And I'll say that I'm not going to give a lot of information about this particular piece, which is almost a customization of a normal donor management database. But we have begun to do things like this in Watergrass, so I'll show you a little bit of what can be done. Tracking project results and the resources conserved. And then some groups wanted to be able to do that to represent it on a map and to keep enough metrics so that they could summarize basic results. And then several of you mentioned that you wanted to finally unify all this in one information or one place. So what gets in the way? You can have a look here at the list. Speaks pretty much for itself. And the fact that there's so many obstacles, it's indicative of how much a database and good use of a database reflects many different aspects of your organization, from how each individual tracks data to whether or not you've got a shared culture where, yes, you have a guideline and yes, you follow the guideline, and people notice if you don't follow the guideline. And then if you've got adequate training, if you've got funding, somebody's got time to watch it, all these things play into using the database well. And they're almost all mentioned here. So for those of you in the soil and water conservation districts and those of you who are doing mainly project tracking, I wanted to take this little detour early because it's not part of the normal flow of my presentation, but I wanted you to see some of the things that could be done and didn't want you to have to wait through the whole thing and think, well, this isn't for me at all. So one thing that we do using the Watergrass database with the Audubon Naturalist Society is that we have, this is actually a live map of their water quality monitoring results. And on it, if we take a look at it, for instance, here we can see one particular, this happens to be a citizen science water quality monitoring survey where they found pretty good water quality. And then they also have, QA/QC surveys from their trained water quality monitors, which are used by, this data is used by the state and the county. And you can add a number of other parameters in here. So this is one way that you could represent projects on a map, and you can add other layers to this map, and we have done that before. So that's one thing I wanted you to see. Another flow of integration that I thought you might be interested in was managing volunteers and sites. And so we have one client who has many different, in this case, businesses or churches or local groups who have adopted a cleanup site. And their lead volunteer is able to set up an event, and then their participants sign up online, and then they can actually submit an event, a report on their mobile phone from the event. So here they are, they're creating the cleanup campaign, identifying the group and the site, start date, end date, what the cleaning supplies they need, when they're going to pick them up, and if this requires a waiver. And then when they do that and it's approved by the organization, then they get an email with a link, and they send out that link, and that allows all their participants to sign up. So here's the sign up form for the participants. This one has a liability waiver in it. Okay. And then finally, when they get all done, this is an example of a mobile report from another organization, the Building Oyster Project in New York. And so they have ambassadors who go out and do presentations for them, so they can answer how many hours did they spend, describe the event, is there follow-up needed, and then upload photos. So these, you could customize these fields. This is the kind of event management or volunteer management that you can do with what's called a customer relationship management system, which is a fancy programmable database, essentially. But a database like Access won't get you here. You do need something like Salesforce. So I wanted to show you those things. That's my detour for you guys in the project management world. And now let's take a look. I'm going to follow a thought process that's based mainly on the experience of nonprofit river and watershed organizations. So we're going to consider three main things, which you folks all mentioned in the obstacles that you mentioned about getting to the database you wanted. One, your organizational ability. Do you gather information in a uniform manner? Are you at ease with the software? Do you need training? And of course, have you got funding? Are you motivated to change to a new way of doing things? And then finally, does the software match your needs? And I'd say that of these things, if you have the first two, you can make most software work. If you don't have the first two, it's unlikely that you'll make any software work. So you have to balance these, and the way we balance them, we developed a tool to try to help you go through that planning process, and it's one that you'll have the link to it so you can get in there and use it yourself. And I'd suggest, if you want to have this conversation in your organization, you gather the people who are interested in the database, or maybe even somebody who isn't interested in the database, so you get another point of view. And you go through this. And this is, we call it our Choose a Database tool. It's not completely finished, but it's 99% of the way, and it will serve you. And this is actually built on the Watergrass database, or on Salesforce, which is the foundation of the Watergrass database. And it is the kind of thing that you can do if you have a programmable customer relationship management system, or a CRM. So I'm going to run us through this because I think it raises most of the questions. Well, we thought about it a long time, and we thought these are the important questions to answer if you're looking around for a database. So here's what we came up with. So if I fill this out. And go to the next page. So the first three questions are going to be about what your current use is and what your goals are. And we consider that there's sort of a spectrum of the way people use their database. Most of them start out with a mailing list and they receive donations. If you just start a watershed organization, that's typically about the first thing that you'll begin to do, is open a book and begin to record who it is you're supposed to be in contact with and when the checks came in. Let's see, and Sean, do you want to tell me for a second? Let's see. Looks like I've got about 10 minutes left. Okay, so that's good. Then organizations, and this would probably apply to soil and water conservation districts, take the next step and they begin doing regular communications. And nonprofits will do appeals and membership renewals. SWCDs may be reaching out to people to get an assessment of how well their land's doing. And then they move, and as you can see, as I click on this one, down below it's going to explain what the activities this requires from you are. So that if I say, well, what I really want to do is track activities and responses to my appeals and outreach, if I want to do that, and I, click down here, then you can see I've got to do all these other things that I mentioned, plus I've got to track email responses and website signups. And if I say, oh no, but what I really want to do is automate the signups to my workshops. So if I want to do that, then I'm going to need these things, and I'm going to need to integrate my website with my database. And finally, if I want to manage everything, then I need to do those things, and I'm going to need to create custom tables and fields for my program work. So these are sort of cumulative. And the question for you might be, how do you currently use it? Let's say right now you are doing this one. You are doing regular communications and appeals. And what would you like to do? Let's imagine where you really want to go is you want to automate your signups and your donations and your follow-ups so that you can build relationships and increase your program effectiveness. So that's your goal. That's the second question. And then what's your database culture like? And as you can see, we've got, somebody mentioned Luddites. Here are the resistant, and I've got a description of it here, which sort of quotes various people who have talked with me at one time or another. And then there's what we call lonely silo, and that's usually where somebody who's managing the data, say a project manager who's got all the program data, or the people in fundraising, are the only ones who use the database. Every so often they send out an email saying to people, please add your latest contact information to the database so that we can send out this year's annual appeal. And as an organization, as this culture develops, then you'll get some early adopters, so you'll actually get a group of people who have a vision of what would happen if the whole organization used the database. And as that moves forward, you move to an early majority. And when you're in the early majority, some people are still resistant, but most of the people are embracing it, and you've got a pathway for people to learn the database and for you to maintain your database practices so that the data goes in well and comes out in forms you understand. And then there's the full embrace. So let's imagine that in our case, we're still in lonely silo. We've got the people in fundraising, and they're saying, man, this organization could be so much more effective if we just got more people to use it. What can we do? So at this point, we can kind of stop, and we can see, all right, we give you feedback. Here's what you've said. You've said your database culture is down here. Your regular communications, this is what you're doing right now. This is where you want to go. In order to go there, you're going to have to also move to early majority. And we give you some feedback. We say, we think you need this kind of a system, and I've already mentioned that. And it's going to mean that you're going to have to add these practices. So these are the things that you as staff would need to do, or volunteers would need to do in order to make this work for you. So let me stop there. There's one more portion to this, and let me stop here and see if there are any questions. And Sean, I can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just looking to see if there's any questions. I don't see that there are any hands going up yet, but I would love to hear folks just say, oh, we're really at this place. We're at the lonely silo, or actually we've really moved into early majority. That's a great way of paraphrasing it. Okay, Katie, I'm going to unmute you. And okay, I think we can hear you, Katie. Go ahead. Are you there? You're unmuted, Katie, but we can't hear you.
She might have muted her own computer.
Yeah, that's possible. While we're waiting, I'm going to ask if there's a question. Would like to get the link for the video. If so, yeah. We're at the lonely silo phase. We are currently resistant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Katie, you're still unmuted if you can.
It's also possible most laptops have a microphone and a camera in them, but many desktops do not.
Yeah. So.
And so, Katie, if that's the case, you may just have to resort to typing.
Okay. So, oh, Katie says, hi, sorry, no microphone. Yeah, hi, Katie. I feel your pain. Okay, I wonder how easy or hard it is to transition from Access database to something like a CRMS. That's one of the comments.
Okay, so my answer, if an Access database, we would probably recommend for this. I probably wouldn't recommend it for this, and the reason, there are groups that do that, but it's just that all the information has to go in manually. So I would say to do the same things in a CRMS that you do in Access, it's not hard to transition. It should be easier in the CRMS than it was in Access. That said, if you're also hoping that you're going to get more people involved and they're doing more things, then and most CRMSs do involve sort of a bump up in the number of people in the organization who adopt the database and use it, then that means that as an organization, you're going to need to increase the practices that you have. Okay.
I have one more question, just asking if this session is being recorded, and the answer is yes, it's being recorded, and the link is going to be posted on the Network of Oregon Watershed Council's website, probably by tomorrow, Connor.
Cool. All right. So on I'm going to go through another 6 slides, and then once again we'll ask for feedback and questions.
Barrett, I'm going to interrupt you one more time. Katie was able to ask a question in the box, so I'm just going to read her question. We are near lonely silo early adopters. We have MailChimp as a way to let folks know about how to register for workshops, then an event registration program on our website. We need to export registrants to CSV, run a few processes to prepare information to load to Access. Do you recommend an integration to bridge all of these? Or would a CRM encompass all of these?
Most CRMs would allow you to integrate those things. And would I recommend it? It would depend on how often you do it. If you do it once a year, it may just be easier to handle those individual components that each by itself isn't that complicated. And then you do the work of grabbing the data and putting it in your database, in your Access database. And when you put it in your Access database, you keep your eyes open to make sure that you're not duplicating, hopefully, which is one thing that a CRM would take care of for you. If you're doing a lot of them a year, then you are probably in a position where you'd save time and headaches by integrating that. The other thing that would happen is that when you integrate it, you can track the process much better so that you can go straight to your database and find out, oops, Here we go. My half hour's up. You can go to the database and see how many people have signed up. And then you can tell, okay, how many people signed up but never came. So what sort of an attrition rate should we expect next time we do this? Things like that are much easier to get through a CRM because it can track the steps in the process. So that's my answer.
Yeah. She says, yay, we do it weekly. It's a bit redundant, especially looking for the duplicates.
I'll bet it is.
Yeah.
I'll bet it is. Yeah. Okay. All right. So then I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the factors that make it easier or harder to get to move forward. And these are really important factors in what's called adoption. And adopting a database, I should just say, is tough. Probably less than half of the large database projects that begin are actually carried through to completion because, usually not because of technical details, usually because staff doesn't adopt them, which is partly due to technical details. Often they have too many bells and whistles or they're hard to understand, but other things too. So what makes for good adoption? Do you have adequate in-house technical expertise? And let's imagine that I answer this one. I say, we got a couple people who can use complex programs because databases and especially CRMs are complicated programs. Okay. So you can, as you're using this tool, you can move this along. Does your executive director or other strong leaders support the move? This is huge. I'm afraid if the executive director's in the database and expects to see reports in the database, then people are very likely to use it. Otherwise, if the executive director gets regular reports, they're somewhat less likely. If the executive director says, well, I'll leave that to you, then it's often a battle. So let's imagine in our case, we've got leaders who are going to read the reports. And there are techniques that you can use with the CRMs to automate the reports so that the executive director or whoever is important running this program gets weekly reports so that they see the data, because as they begin to see the data regularly, they're going to begin to ask, well, gosh, I thought that, we had 200 people signed up. This only says 150. Why is that? And they'll begin to ask about the quality of the data, and then people will care more about the database. Obsessiveness. Have you got what we call a database maven? The person who's going to obsess about getting the data right. And this person is, in my experience as the person who gives technical support, these folks are often difficult, but they are absolutely essential. And you go from people who are not really detail oriented and they say, oh yeah, it's probably good enough. But the good people are just sticklers. And when something's not right, they want to know why, and it bothers them. And having somebody on your team who does this is important. Okay. And then if you're in the perfect position, they're not only sticklers, but they're good at getting other people to follow up as well. Adherence. Do people in your organization easily adopt and follow set procedures? Some organizations allow just about everybody to run their own program in their own particular way. Other organizations say, no, we need a more unified way to track data. Okay. And imagine I'm answering each one of these, but if you were in your organization, you can discuss these things. And about this one, I would say, if installing a database is the first time that you're asking everybody to get on the same page as far as data procedures go, you can imagine part of the resistance to the database will come from people actually making the cultural shift to being willing to work together following one set of guidelines. Okay. Support. Have you got adequate tech support? I over the years that we've been tracking people's satisfaction with databases, the one factor that correlates most strongly with how happy they are with their database is whether they've got tech support, adequate tech support. Organizations who decide they're going to go it alone and have a volunteer program the database and they're going to kind of learn their way through it are much less likely to be satisfied in the end than organizations that get ongoing tech support. Benefits. Is there a benefit that's going to justify this to people? And it really needs to be fairly soon. It needs to be a pretty quick win for them. If you're saying to them, well, this will be terrific and we can get, when 5 years down the road we'll have these incredible numbers, that's not going to cut it for most of the people who are considering, well, how much time am I going to spend putting data into the database or learning a new way to do things? Okay. So, and this is really important because often database projects are initiated by the folks who would see the benefit. The resistance comes from the folks who say, I'm good enough as it is. And it's important to find ways to give those other potentially, the people that you can swing, if you will, the swing votes, to give them some early benefits so that they go, oh, I'm on board with that. Yeah, it's not too much work. And look, I get this report automatically, and I used to have to generate it. Okay. So if I answered all these questions the way that you see here, here's our top of our head analysis of where we think it would be easy to go. And we think it would be easy for, in this particular case, our goal is to move up here, and we think it would be easy to get here. And as we're going to improve this graphic, and it's going to show here actually what we think an ambitious stretch would be. Chances are that moving all the way to automating signups, we think that's ambitious, but if you've got a good program, you can make it work. And that's going to require, we're saying if it were easy, if you take the easy route, you could use this software. If you say, no, we really want the client relationship management software, and you click on this, so you click on which one of these you like, or go through all of them, and you'll find a link to our recommendations. So here are the software that's been recommended by other organizations through the survey, and it's got an outline of the costs, and then a lot of best practices. If you decide that you really want to move to this level, these are things that you're going to need to take seriously. Okay, so that's how that tool works, and it'll get you to these final pages. And okay, so any other questions at this point?
Yes, we do have one. Okay. I like the idea of soliciting data from partners, organizations, volunteers, etc. However, there is a huge barrier there concerning getting these people to participate, especially if such solicitations require a large demand on participants' time. Do you have suggestions for making these seem more appealing or even painless?
Yeah. Ask for a minimum of information, the minimum that you need in order to sign up for your events. And our minimum is first name, last name, email, and zip code, because we use those to match people. And then if they're signing up for a volunteer event that involves a waiver and getting in the water, then with the waiver, we also require a phone number because we want to be able to get in touch with them, and usually an address. The waiver will have that written on it anyway when they turn it in. And then each time you get in touch with them again, you try to add some more information to that. And there are ways that databases or that CRMs do that. They sort of try to flesh out the information as they go along. Um, you probably have a ton of information already on written sign-up lists. I know when I was organizing, I sure did. And the question was, am I going to input that? We have, with Watergrass, we have tools where if you go to an event, you can actually take along a pad, a tablet, and if you've got Wi-Fi at the event, then you can have people sign in on the tablet. It goes straight into the database and you never have to touch it again. And that's sort of the gold standard, because typically organizers are so crazy busy that they don't have time to go around and make sure that everybody's signed up. Okay, let me continue so I get done in time. We looked at, in the databases, we looked at how satisfied people were in terms of would they recommend it again. And for very small groups, Little Green Light, which was also not very expensive, about $700 a year, I think, was highly recommended. Not very flexible, but handles a lot of basic functions well. And then costs rise. Here's Donor Perfect and GiftWorks, which are two software packages that aim particularly aim at fundraising and aren't very customizable beyond that. As you can see, people who are just using Excel and Access tend to be pretty frustrated, although I will also say that there are groups that have used Access for many years and they raise a lot of money despite the fact that they're very frustrated with it. Watergrass, and here's Salesforce. Watergrass gets higher marks, and my guess is mainly because, one, it's already comes customized for river and watershed groups, and two, we give 2 hours of support a month. And for a complicated database, Salesforce is complicated. There's no way around it. People just need that support. And then Salsa is much more expensive for the groups that use it. These are large groups. They tend to be regional groups, and it does outreach and advocacy really well. It's also not really customizable for projects or anything like that, but for advocacy and online petitions, it's great. So I asked questions.
So, Baird, yeah, there's a couple of questions, and I think one of them you might want to take offline. It's pretty specific to one circumstance, but I'll just state the question anyway. Tracy, it's from you. Do you have any recommendations for a very small organization, 1 or 2 staff, that wants to establish a database for tracking client relationships? I'm using Excel now and was planning to move to Access. I'm the only one using it right now, but as we grow, our database should still be functional. And then the second question, do CRMs also have the capacity for surveying event or workshop participants?
Okay.
And that's from Katie. It's a great question.
Yep, okay, Katie. Absolutely, CRMs do. And the other things, and the answer is yes, and they integrate with programs like SurveyMonkey. So one of the big advantages of the big CRMs like Salesforce is that they're so big that most of the other providers, like the email providers like MailChimp and Vertical Response, integrate with them, and SurveyMonkey just released its integration and so on, so that it's easier to get information in and out. Now that said, it never comes in perfectly. You almost always have to end up going in and looking at it and tweaking it. But it's not that hard to get the bulk of the information in. And then if you were to look, for instance, let me open up what we got here. Okay. If we go to, I'll show you. Here's our survey, which we hope you guys will take. This is about you and your organization. And so this is our survey of what you're using and how much you like it, and it gets a lot more specific. So this is where we draw our information from when we make recommendations. And this is all written on the CRM. It's written in Salesforce. And this data goes straight into the database. So the answer is yes. Okay. Okay. And that, and when it's custom programmed like that, then the integration is much smoother. It also takes money, so you end up deciding, well, you know, it's only a small SurveyMonkey survey, and I'm only going to do it once, so I'll just do it that way. Whereas if you're going to put something out, like say, you wanted participant reviews for every workshop, and you wanted each one to give it, that would be a good thing to put in your database and write in a CRM so that you would actually have the record of your workshop, and then attached to it you'd have all the evaluations. Okay. Any more,
so
Sean?
Baird, I don't see any more questions. We're out of time, but I want to make sure that people know how to reach you if they want to have some follow-up questions. I know you're inviting folks to do that.
Cool.
And yeah, go ahead, finish your next steps. That's an important part of it.
All right. So for next steps, if there are groups that are really focused on the project tracking aspects, I'd be glad to have a call with you. It's something that we've begun to program, and we're really curious to know if there's sort of a standard set of requirements that you have that would be easy to include in a standardized way as opposed to customizing for every group. There's the Connect conference coming up next year, and hopefully I'll be able to be there, so I'd be glad to meet with you then. You can send me an email. There's my email, and you'll have a copy. You'll get the link to the PowerPoint, so you'll be able to do that. And then Ryan Carter at River Network has kindly offered to be a resource person as groups look for their own databases. He manages their database, which is Salesforce. He's been through a lot of iterations of it, so he'd be a good person to talk to. And then finally, here are the resources. Here's a link to the Choose a Database tool. Here's a link to the survey of databases, which I showed you. And here are the condensed findings of that survey for the last 2 years.
Fantastic.
And I would say, might I ask, if there are groups that are interested in either follow-up or in talking about project tracking and how that might work in a database, then would you please indicate that now to Sean so that she knows who you are and can get back in touch.
Okay, great.
I'm done. Thank you.
Fantastic, Baird. Well, I know that for the network of Oregon Watershed Councils, we walked through this tool during your session in Michigan at the conference, and we just found it super helpful to be able to think together as a staff and as a board about where we are and where we think we need to be. So I really want to thank you, Baird, for your work and your commitment to the river and conservation community, and for putting this tool together that everybody can use for free.
Cool.
And it looks like folks have got some contact information for you if they want to follow up. Cool. And folks can follow up with additional questions to me directly. You can get me at Sean@OregonWatersheds.org, and I will follow up with Baird as well. So we'll just end here, and just remind you that this is going to be posted on the Network of Oregon Watersheds Council's website if you want to send the link to any of your colleagues or anybody else in your office. And I want to thank everybody for jumping in and being part of this discussion, and let's keep talking.
Thank you all.